Peter the rock, and I failed. I tried being the guy that Jesus could count on, and I disappointed him. So I'm just going to go back to something I know how to do. So it leads us to our first point, which is failure doesn't make us just feel bad. It makes us question who we are. When we fail, we start to question who we are or what our worth is, and what our values are. And some failures don't merely produce regret, they rewrite our identity. I failed, so I'm a failure. So often in our life and in our culture today, you are what you can do. What can you do? Well, I can open up someone's chest and repair their heart. Oh, well, you're a heart surgeon. That's something. What can you do? I take pictures at weddings. Oh, well, you're a photographer. So we are what we can do. And so if you feel like you're a failure at something, you'd feel like, what am I? What am I even? I failed. I'm a failure. I've sinned, and so I'm a fraud. I blew my marriage. I relapsed in my addiction. I lost my temper again. I screwed up my kids. I went back to the thing I promised God I would quit. I knew better, and I did it anyway. And eventually we land in the place in our faith where we're like, well, maybe I'm just not who I thought I was. Maybe I'm just, How many melt-aways can I eat? By the way, I didn't have any melt-aways last night, but I did have a lot of their brownies. The brownies, those brownies. I didn't even know Cerrugi's made brownies. But then on the way home, I didn't have any more brownies. I ate, they had, because the other half of the marriage, they own orchards up in Door County. And so I had some dried tart cherries, which are antioxidant. That's not a real word. Peter wasn't simply ashamed of something he did. He lost confidence in who he is. Don't raise your hand, but raise your hand. I'm failing at this. Who am I? Am I even anything? I remember there's a time, I'm on my second marriage. I sound like Elizabeth Taylor. I'm on my second marriage, and there was a time in my current marriage where things were not great. And I remember talking to someone about it, and they're like, Scott, 2 marriages? You're screwing up 2 marriages? Oh, gosh. And so I was like, yep, I've done it again. Why am I even trying to be married? Clearly, I suck at it. If one marriage falls apart, you're like, that person sucked, right? But if you screw it up twice, you're like, maybe it's me. And what shame does is it loves sending us backwards. This is the enemy working in our lives. If we're ashamed of how we failed or ashamed of what we did or didn't do, it pulls us backwards to where we had come from, back to old habits and old identities and old coping mechanisms. For Peter, into old boats. Well, I'm not the rock, I'm not the disciple, I'm not the protector of Christ. I'm just going to go back to fishing. So failure says, go back. You obviously weren't cut out for this. You weren't cut out to be the disciple. You weren't cut out to be the rock. And so he quits. And the Bible is full of quitters. There's a guy named John Mark, and he's the guy who quit in Acts 13:13, Acts 15:36 through 40, and 2 Timothy 4:11. John Mark was like a friend of Paul and Barnabas. And somewhere on that first missionary journey, John Mark did something that made Paul mad. He disappointed him somehow, and Paul kicked him out of their group. It's like, go on now and get. Like, you stink at this. I don't need you anymore. We don't know exactly why, but Paul considers the failure serious enough that he refuses to take Mark on the next trip. And that causes a legitimate break or rupture between Paul and Barnabas. Now they're fighting because Barnabas didn't feel like John Mark was that bad, but Paul's like, no, he's bad. But then years later, Paul says, bring Mark with you when you come, for he will be helpful to me in my ministry. This guy that screwed up so bad that Paul kicked him out, Paul's asking for him again. And that it's a fantastic failure story because the man that Paul wouldn't take eventually became the man that Paul asked for. There's a lesson there for us because sometimes we feel like, well, this didn't take. I must suck at this. God doesn't have any use for me. And that's not what's happening. It makes me think of Moses. And I feel like this murder that he did was kind of a failed deliverer period. I don't think we talk about this enough. In Exodus 2:11 through 15, Moses sees injustice, right? He sees like the Egyptians persecuting the Hebrews, right? So he kills an Egyptian and hides the body. And then he finds out that everybody knows that he had done that. And so he runs. He doesn't own it. He's like, yep, I killed the Egyptian. He runs. He takes off. Shoot. Goes off to Midian, right? Where he meets Sephora, right? Who's beautiful, according to Cecil B. DeMille, because that was, what's her name? Because she was Lily Munster. What was that lady's name? Yvonne DiCarlo. Yvonne DiCarlo. If you've never watched the Ten Commandments, watch the Ten Commandments because Sephora's like, oh my gosh. Anyway, so he runs off to Midian to hide. For 40 years, he's hiding in his failure. 40 years. So when the burning bush happens, it's not God recruiting like a new leader. It's God calling a man whose first attempt at the mission ended with a corpse in the sand and 4 decades in obscurity. Moses thought his failure had sent him into exile, and God knew it had sent him into preparation. So is it possible in your failure that God's preparing you for something? Can you look at something you failed at and say, well, that's that. Might as well go back to fishing. Might as well go back to whatever I was doing before. And some of it is a boat of fishing. Some of it's back to our addictions. Some of it's back to the way that we're coping with things or our understanding of ourselves. And that's not always what God's up to. We're not supposed to quit. The Bible isn't primarily the story of people who never quit. It's the story of a God who doesn't quit on the people who do. Come on, somebody. Amen. So in that same way, Jesus meets Peter at the place he retreated to. It says this in John 21. So they went off and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. And as dawn was breaking, Jesus stood beside the seashore, but the disciples didn't know that it was Jesus. Children, he said, children, haven't you got anything to eat? No, they replied. They didn't know it was Jesus. At dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, and I love that image. If you've ever been out on the water and you're coming back to your cottage, or coming back to your resort, or coming back to the boat landing, there's just something, just nice about coming back. And what I love about it is that this isn't Peter going searching for Jesus, right? He knows that Jesus is alive. He didn't go searching for Jesus. He went fishing. So what does Jesus do? Jesus comes to find him. And I love that. And what does Jesus have waiting? Breakfast. The most important meal of the day. Breakfast. Not a courtroom, not an intervention, not a confrontation, not a disciplinary hearing. Breakfast. And there's something really incredible here in this verse, John 21:9. When they came to land, they saw a charcoal fire laid there with fish and bread on it. I just want to tell you something really important. There's this Greek word that's used here, anthrakia. Anthrakia. A bed of burning coals, a fire of coals, a charcoal fire. The term denotes a small heap of glowing charcoal, fuel that burns hot and clean, relatively smokeless. In the first century Near East, such fires were common for cooking, for warding off the night chill, especially in courtyards or along the shore where open flames would otherwise be extinguished by wind. Let me remind you this. John 18:18. It was closed. This is after Jesus was arrested. The slaves and the attendants had made a charcoal fire. What did we just call that? An anthrakia. Too far. There was an anthrakia. And they were standing around it, warming themselves, and Peter was standing there with them, warming himself. So, John 18:18, Peter is warming himself by a charcoal fire when he denies Jesus 3 times. I don't even know that dude. By the fire. I don't even know that dude. A few days later, John 21:9, Jesus made a charcoal fire when he restores Peter. Same smell. You smell it? Same smell. Same kind of fire. Different ending. There are only 2 charcoal fires in the entire New Testament, and Peter stands beside both of them. Only twice do they talk in the New Testament about anthrakia. Twice. Both with Peter, both about Jesus. This smell. A fire like this. So can you imagine? I don't know about you, but smell means everything to me. If I smell something, I'm immediately taken back to whatever that was, right? If you spray Dracar Noir right now, I'm immediately back in boot camp because that was the only cologne you could buy at the commissary at the end of boot camp, and you could get dressed up and see your parents. You just Dracar Noir. So whenever I smell Dracar Noir, that's what I think of. When I smell, this campfire smell, I think of Peninsula State Park, and as a kid, like I remember camping at Peninsula State Park and this smell. So can you imagine this smell for Peter? I don't even know that guy. Bruh, I don't know him. Sitting by the campfire. His clothes smell like this, right? They smell like this. Now that's it. Like solidified, cemented. So when he gets to shore with Jesus, and Jesus has the same fire going, can you imagine what that does for Peter? How that brings Peter back. Jesus is willing to meet you at the scene of your failure and write a different ending. Come back to the campfire. It might be scary for you. It might be traumatic for you. But come back because Jesus wants to meet you at the site of your failure to rewrite the story. And I love how Jesus feeds Peter before he gets anything sorted out. Before he says, so tell me more about this denial, Peter. Before he says any of that, he puts food in his belly. Grace comes first. Mercy comes first. Oh, bro, you must be hungry. You stayed up all night fishing and didn't catch anything. Here's some fish and some bread. Let's start there. Let's start with satisfying this most basic need you have. And I love that. Jesus doesn't pretend that the failure never happened. So when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus spoke to Simon Peter. Simon, son of John, he said, do you love me more than these? Yes, master, he said, you know I'm your friend. Well then, he said, feed my lambs. Pause. Simon, son of John, said Jesus again for a second time, do you love me? Yes, master, Peter said, you know I'm your friend. Well then, he said, look after my sheep. Pause. Simon, son of John, said Jesus a third time, are you my friend? Jesus was upset that he asked for a third time. Jesus asked, are you my friend? Master, he said, you know everything! Exclamation point. You know I'm your friend. Well then, Jesus said, feed my sheep. Now listen, grace isn't cool, doesn't matter. Forgive and forget. That's not grace. Jesus asked Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me? 3 times he asked him that question. Peter denied Jesus 3 times, and now Jesus gives Peter 3 opportunities to say, you know I'm your friend, and I love you. If you just asked him once, would that have been enough? Peter knows he denied him 3 times. So doesn't it take 3 questions to rebuild it all the way back? Isn't Jesus promising to rebuild you all the way back? Not just get you started on your way back, but build you all the way back? And that's what he did for Peter. And by the 3rd time, Peter's hurt because of course he is. But restoration isn't always painless. There's pain in restoration. My mother-in-law, way back in December, was by herself at her house, and she was reaching up in the cupboard and fell and broke her upper thigh. So not quite her hip, but close enough to the hip where it's a problem. She's still recovering. In fact, this week, her restoration is a different kind of surgery. Yep, forget about the plates, we're going to put in pins, or forget about the pins, we're going to put in plates. Abby, I see you looking around this column at me. You know what's really great about the Malthy Center? There are no columns. So if you're in a bad seat where you can't see me, that won't be a problem. I'm sorry, Abby. Jesus isn't humiliating Peter. But don't think that the charcoal fire is a coincidence. Don't think that the 3 asks are a coincidence. It's a rebuilding. Jesus is bringing Peter's failure into the light where it can finally stop owning him. And there's an important distinction here. Condemnation says, look what you did, you're finished. But this conviction, this graceful conviction says, look at what you did, let's deal with it so you can move forward. Not, let's forget it even happened. Not that. You can't build on that. You can't build on a lie. Sometimes we want to do that. I wish they would just, last night on the way home, sorry, I'm telling a lot of stories today. On my way home, I was driving back from Egg Harbor, and I got over the bridge in Sturgeon Bay. Does anyone know what the speed limit is there on that bridge going over? 45. Dang it. Because you get off that bridge and it's divided. You're like, well, this is a highway. It's not a highway, Lisa. You know who told me that? Woo! And if you know my speeding stories, bro. So again, cop comes and said, listen, I said, listen to me. She'll leave. My wife will leave me. If you write me a ticket right now, she'll leave. And I'm not even kidding. Like I'm positive. So I was like, oh my gosh. Why was I telling you this? Oh, conviction, let's deal with what you... Listen, so sometimes we just want it to, like, let's just forget this whole thing ever happened. And that's what I was praying to God right in front of my friend Tommy. Lord, please, Jesus, let this guy forget that ever happened. Please. Please. Will you wait till the end of this story? Anyway. So I'm like, please. And so he comes back, and he must be, I don't know, 12 or 13, this cop. And they do this as though, like, I'm like this, like, urban threat. He knocks on my window over, like, he says, so good news. I'm just going to give you a verbal warning. I'm like, oh, praise Jesus. Now it never happened. I didn't have to tell Kate. Oh, shoot. Forget everything I just said. But that's how we want to get out of trouble. If we could just not know about it. Can we just pretend it never happened? If I can just get this letter out of the mail before my wife sees it. If I could just stop someone being informed of this thing before they find out, then everything will be fine. It'll all be in secret. But you can't build anything on secrets. You can only build stuff on truth. And so I have to tell Kate. I have to tell Kate, listen, I almost got a ticket last night. And I can say all the reasons I want. Divided highway, middle of the night, thinking about deer, I'm tired. I can think about all these excuses. But in fact, I was going 57 miles in a 45 mile an hour zone. And I need to own that to Kate. This is a small example. What are you hiding? What do you feel ashamed of? What do you feel like it's a failure that you're trying to hide from somebody because you can't build anything on that? It's Jell-O. Hiding things is like Jell-O. You're not going to build a house on Jell-O. So you can't build a life on Jell-O. You can't build a life on lies. So restoration is painful. It's going to hurt sometimes, and Jesus acknowledges that. So Jesus doesn't erase responsibility from Peter, but neither does he confuse Peter's failure with Peter's identity. He doesn't say, this is who you are. Jesus doesn't forgive Peter. He trusts him again. After each answer that Peter gives, Jesus says, feed my lambs. Take care of my sheep. Feed my sheep. Peter might have reasonably expected, Jesus to say, okay, you're forgiven, but you have to sit this next part out. You're on detention. You're on probation. You're on, what is it called? Like when you get in trouble at work and you're on like a... Probation? No, it's like you're such a snot. I'm so glad you're back. No, it's like an EEP or a PPE. But what did you say? PIP? What does that stand for? A performance improvement plan. You can tell that Chelsea's a manager. He doesn't put Peter on a PIP. He gives him a job right out of the gate. Jesus says the opposite. I've still got something for you to do. And think about how crazy that is. Peter cried so hard that there was tracks built into his cheeks. Remember, that's what Sister Angela Marie said. He thought, this is it. This is who I am. But Jesus gives him a job. Jesus entrusts his sheep to the guy who wouldn't even admit knowing him just a few days earlier. God bless you. Failure didn't disqualify Peter from being used by God. In fact, Peter's failure may have prepared him to shepherd people differently. Maybe this denial, this betrayal, this failure and restoration Maybe that prepared him to shepherd people differently than he would have otherwise. Because now Peter knows what it's like to be weak. He knows what it's like to make a promise he can't keep. He knows what it's like to need mercy. The Peter of John 21 is probably safer to entrust the broken people with than the Peter who confidently announced, even if everyone else deserts you, I will not. Broken Peter might actually be a better shepherd than confident Peter. I think I've told you this before. Back when I was young, like your age, I felt like I'm going to be a minister of the word. I'm going to be a preacher. Because, are you kidding? I'm super funny. I'm clever. I'm entertaining. I'm going to be a preacher. And if I had been on that track, maybe I would have been this really super popular preacher guy. Maybe. But that's not the pastor that God wanted me to be. I had said at that time, I'll do everything except actually having a relationship with people. I don't want anything to do with one-on-one conversations. I don't want anything to do with visiting the hospital. I don't want anything to do with, I don't want anything to do with any of that. I'll stand up there by the pulpit, la-da, jazz hands. And God didn't let that happen for me. I remember I was at a big church and I said, hey, I want to be the new this pastor. They're like, nope, you're not. And then I was at another big church and I'm like, hey, I want to be this pastor. Nope, you're not. Because I thought it was, the show. I thought it was jazz hands. And it's not. And I was broken by that. And so if you know me as your pastor and you love me as your pastor because you're like, oh, but Scott just cares. Gosh darn it. If you feel that way, that's because God broke me from the other guy. God broke the jazz hands guy. And so by all accounts, there's us, there's 50 of us, right? But, at bigchurch.com, there's 2,000 people there today. So you could look at me and say, failure. And sometimes I do. This week my son did. We were driving somewhere. I was passing one of my brother's churches. And I said, yeah, that's Uncle Mick. He built that thing. What are you doing? How long have you been doing this, Dad? 5 years? I don't think you're very good at it, Dad. Fair. But you could see where the world looks at it that way. But I'm starting to not. I'm starting to not. And that's the same thing for Peter. I could have said that I'm a failure and I'm not. And I think the same thing happened to Peter. Last step. Peter has just had one of the most intimate encounters with God or with Jesus in the entire gospel. This thing, will you feed my sheep, blah, blah, blah. 3 denials, 3 questions, 3 affirmations, 3 commissions, everything great. Jesus has walked Peter right back through his failure, then entrusted his sheep to Peter again. And then Jesus tells Peter something difficult. Because following Jesus is eventually going to cost Peter his life. He says this in 21:9. He told him about how he's going to have to die just like Jesus did to indicate the sort of death by which Peter would bring God glory. And when he had said this, he added, knowing this, I still need you to follow me. Knowing that you're going to die doing this, knowing that it's going to cost you, I still need you to follow me. And what does Peter do? So Jesus like, listen, it's going to suck. It's going to be hard. It's going to be painful, but I need you to do it. I need you to feed my sheep. Peter's like, okay. And he looks behind him, and there's John. And he says, well, what about him, Lord? Can you imagine? Peter just got forgiven, right? Just got recommissioned, right? And he's like, and now I'm going to have to die for it. And then he looks at John, he says, well, what about this guy? Is he going to have to die? And it's such a profoundly human response. Even in our restoration, the moment of our restoration, we start looking around. Well, what about that guy? What about that lady? How come they wait, what about them? Is he going to suffer like me? Is his road going to be easier than mine? Why does he get that life while I get this one? Why does bigchurch.com pastor get a house in Indian Trails? Why does he get like churches on both coasts? What about him? What about me, Lord? And Jesus gives Peter an answer that is almost startlingly direct. He says, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what's that to you? As for you, you follow me. His gig is not your gig. Bigchurch.com, pastor, not my gig. You're my gig. So like, what's that to you? And don't we do that in our lives? We look at other Christians and say, well, why isn't it hard for them? Poor Mike Miller yesterday was here selling some of those chairs, and like he went to cross in front of that chair cart right there and tripped over the thing. Mike's already got a bad leg and a bad hip, some bad ribs. His arm's bad. Mike's like, I don't know. Someone's got to put Mike back together. Anyway, he tripped over one of those things, and now he like twisted his knee all up. He's got to go to the surgeon on Monday. Could you see where Mike could be like, bro? We can't look at other people and say, well, this is how God favors people. So if I don't have what they have, God must not be favoring me. Stop doing that. If you're doing it, stop doing it. Comparison, a friend of mine once said, is the thief of joy. The second I look at what you have, and I think I don't have it, it's taking away my joy. There's this kid that goes to school with Abe. His name is Tice. He's really handsome. He's got this thick black hair. He's got this olive skin. He's a beautiful kid, right? And I thought I would get to do his senior pictures, and he didn't. And so the photographer posted a picture of him, and it's stunning. It's like his athletic one, so he's got his soccer kit on, and he's got his flag, the U.S. flag around his shoulders like this, like he's in the Olympics. I'm like, bro, he plays soccer at Preble, man. But the picture is stunning. And it makes me feel like, what am I even doing, man? I suck at this. Compared to that, I suck. And we do that. We look at what other people are doing, what we're doing, we think they're better at it than me, so forget it. I'm just going to quit. Stop comparing yourself to others. Peter's going to stop looking. He just got forgiven. Well, what about him? And Jesus says, Peter, his story is none of your business. Tice with his flag and whoever that photographer was, none of my business. I sat in a field last night in the rain, and the bride was there, and the groom, and I had a light, and the sun was starting to come, or like, it was a beautiful sky. And so I sat down on the wet grass, right, and I have him dip her in the veil and the thing, right, and I shoot it with a light, and I'm telling you, killed it. Just last night I said it. I said to them, I just killed that. I killed it. You guys hired the best photographer. It's what I said. You did. She did the ceremony. Then some joker did the rest of your day. So, but then here I am. It was like 3 hours later that I'm sitting in bed. Oh, Tice's photo with the flag and that light. And oh, I suck. Do you do that? Do you do that, with your friends? Do you do that with your family? Do you do that at work? Do you do that wherever you are? Like, well, look what they have. I don't have that. Stop doing that. Your story is your story. You're the main character of your story. Stop trying to insert yourself into other people's story. Well, if I were in that story, this is what I would have. Nope, that's not your story, man. This is your story. Who are you in your story? It's such an important piece. Don't spend the rest of your life looking sideways at what everyone else gets. And I feel like that's where failure keeps some of us, lost. We're lost in failure, where we just focus on that. Not because Jesus hasn't forgiven us, not because Jesus can't use us, but because we keep comparing our story to somebody else's. Well, they didn't blow up their marriage. They didn't lose all those years to addiction or bad habits. They didn't make that decision. They didn't waste that opportunity. They don't carry my consequences. Don't sit in that. Not for 1 minute longer. Because they screwed up too. And why did, you can't account for that. You don't know what's going on in someone else's life. Jesus just says, what is that to you? You follow me. There's a charcoal fire behind you. Move forward. Jesus has already met you there. You're already in the restoration process. Sometimes we take a step back, right? But keep facing forward. There will always be someone beside you whose story looks better than yours. It's just a story. There's still a road in front of you. And the invitation that Jesus gives the man who denied him 3 times is the same invitation he gave Peter at the very beginning, follow me. So stop staring backward at your failure and start looking and stop looking sideways at the others who are doing something else and look at Jesus and follow him. As always, the best part for me of Remnant Church is these next 15 minutes where we've come up with a handful of discussion questions that you can use. You can just talk about whatever you want at your table. But formation happens not because of what I know or what I say. It happens on your response to that with each other. That's how we grow in our faith, is this conversation that happens next. So let's just take 15 minutes to do that, then I'll come back up and we'll close.